All right. Good evening. Good evening. I've just got the boys on mute just while people join and we get stuff sorted and the introductions done from my side, and then I'll bring the guys into the conversation as well. So we'll just give everybody a couple of minutes. Not going to do any intro music or anything like that for now. And then we'll get in and we'll chat some runes. We'll talk about the ecosystem as a whole, and then we'll just dive into basically where the conversation takes us. We'll probably look at maybe 45 minutes or so. I don't want to keep the guys too long, so yeah, we'll have a good conversation and we'll peel off when we need to peel off. GM, Reef bottomed, man, just coming straight in with a TA again. It's a classic. I'm good. Sup, CBS? This is CBS. Hello, CBS. All right, we'll let me bring the guys in and we'll get the conversation. All right, you guys are live. So it would help if I turn the audio up on you. So like I gave that nice introduction, but there was no sound on your side, but there is now. So the audience can hear you when you speak.
See.
Okay, awesome. What's up, man? Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So Al, why don't you give kind of like an introduction to you, your time in the space, anything you want to cover off, and then we'll do the same for Joe, and then we'll get over with the conversations.
Awesome. So I was full-time crypto since 2021, basically. I had like lightly dabbled before that, and I was pretty fixated on just Ethereum for 2 years. And in 2022, that just ended up being the most soul-draining experience ever. And I was looking for something else to inspire me, to excite me. And I saw this post by Eric Wall about ordinals and just essentially what amounted to NFTs on Bitcoin. And it literally kept me up at night. Like I could not sleep. So I just ranted at every close friend I had in the space and asked a bunch of people to follow me down the rabbit hole and just set up nodes, figure out how to set up nodes and like make inscriptions. Like who knew if we were going to make, be able to sell any of them? Like, the worst case scenario, we figured we'd just be ahead of everyone else on the technology and know how to trade the ecosystem well. And then we made this Pepe project that blew up, and I literally haven't looked back ever since. Bitcoin I mean, it's just so fucking obvious. Like, and it's sort of reinforced that original conviction again and again and again over the past over a year now. Right. I mean, it's just this insane asymmetric opportunity on chain on the biggest fucking asset in the space.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I'm glad that you dived into like immediately like the bullish case as well. Like there was no prompting needed on the bullish case. You were just like bam straight in with it. And I noticed that you said like that patch of time was the most soul draining kind of like experience on ETH. All I can say is like thank God that you aren't doing it this time around, because I think if there's something that's worse than soul draining, I think that's the ETH experience this time around.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, it looks so miserable.
Yeah.
And every time I still have like a bunch of fucking ETH NFTs, and just every time I look at my wallet, I'm sadder. It's
yeah,
really
sure.
Just don't even think about it.
Yeah, just write it off. Just write it off to zero. It's like that's it. That's the easiest way to mentally deal with it, I think now. So
100%.
And Joe, why don't you for anybody who doesn't know FarmerJoe, why don't you give a rundown into yourself, background, and what you're up to at the moment, maybe?
Yeah, no. Thanks CBS for having me. I mean, I kind of started out in crypto kind of post DeFi summer. Much like Owl, actually, I guess that is an extension to like the ETH ecosystem. Kind of followed along that DeFi was going to come to other L2s and love the kind of scaling positioning. So I was kind of an on-chain native from like, I guess it would have been like late 2020, all the way through and through, I guess booms and busts, and was just an enjoyer of all things Web3 and retail narratives, community fun, Discord trenches, so
Yep.
to speak. And then I was actually in just like a group chat from, I guess, one of these like alpha chats, and one of the guys was very, keen on BSV. He was kind of a BSV maxi
Oh,
in a lot of ways,
damn.
but followed AC and the whole ordinals spiel.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of just posted one day, he's just like, there's inscriptions coming. It's like there's 500 of them so far, but NFTs are coming to Bitcoin. And from that, it just kind of clicked to me. And so, yeah, I was just basically finding every single, I guess, 100 collection at the time, because 10K collections were not a thing. And was kind of minting them, flipping them, good ones, and just kind of stayed through and through, believing that Bitcoin will have a Web3 ecosystem that really resembles other chains like Ethereum and some of the L2s that many people are very vastly familiar with. And so where it started, with ordinals, I always had this ambition and this vision that fungibles and, I guess, meme coins in a lot of ways will come to will come to Bitcoin, but more importantly, like DeFi primitives will come to Bitcoin. So slowly having those. For those of you that might not necessarily know me, I accidentally, um, I guess, created a meme coin in a community called Opium, and so that predates the Bitcoin puppets. And then have just been kind of guiding it from. I mean, I've been actively guiding it, quite frankly. So it was kind of like the first Bitcoin token that made its way to Solana, first kind of Bitcoin token that made its way to Moonshot, which is, I guess, a retail friendly application. And I just vibe with the puppet community, um, pretty deeply. I think they're the funniest, most memeable people out there, and I think for them to have maybe like a community adopted meme coin, so to speak, that has been airdropped, I guess, both times. I can kind of go into that later on, but yeah, I would say it's like the most widely adopted community meme coin of the Bitcoin puppets and opium holders, and it was the first Bitcoin meme coin outside of like Ordi and Sats to hit 1 billion in market cap. Pretty crazy times.
Yeah.
It also was one of the only projects as a meme coin that pulled back 99%. Um, but it's still around. It's thriving.
Yeah.
It's the second highest market cap rune right now out there. So, still very much committed to making that a success story.
Right. Lovely. Great intro as well. Like provided a ton of lore. And then also touched on kind of, where we are in the current day. One thing that you mentioned in there is kind of BTC having the same Web3 ecosystem as other chains. So like if I was to say, like, where do you think we are right now kind of in that process? Like what do you think that looks like right now on BTC?
So I think that's a really good question. So, I mean, if you just look at the infrastructure that we have right now, I would say it's feature parity on the ordinal side. We have borrow and lend marketplaces for ordinals. We have trading marketplaces for ordinals. So I think we're feature parity and caught up to other chains in that regard. But when it comes down to fungibles and meme coins,
Mm-hmm.
the infrastructure certainly isn't there. And then anything DeFi primitive related, we're certainly like, 6 months to a year out from. I think I was overly optimistic to call it Bitcoin DeFi summer.
Sure.
In the summer of 2023.
Yep.
I was very early to say it, I guess, this summer, and I was brutally wrong. But I think my next summer will certainly have, the combination of a bull run and this Bitcoin DeFi summer when things start to play catch up. I think that if you just look at like where we are, I think we're probably like ETH 2018, mid 2018, maybe late 2018 levels of just, I would say, a hair, just months away from potential major inflection points, and these inflection points typically bring a lot of TVL and capital and interest to it.
Yeah.
I think the most exciting part for me to just continuously remain on a chain like Bitcoin, rather than in the past, chain hopping from Polygon, from Avalanche, from Phantom, and I would say like the playground type stories of what's coming to those chains has already happened on the other one, and things moved very quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas on Bitcoin, because it's so difficult to build on, things move at snail's pace, which means you can have the ordinals narrative, you can have the meme coin narrative, you can have the DeFi narrative, and they all just stack and compound on each other.
Yep.
And because it's Bitcoin, everything is in Bitcoin, so I'm just stacking more Bitcoin.
Sure.
Generally speaking,
Yeah.
with things being priced in Sats rather than dollars and USDC or USDT terms.
Yeah.
There's no reason for me to go anywhere else. It's like,
Yeah.
it's Bitcoin, and I think it's just really simple not to overthink that feature.
Yep.
Just because it's slow doesn't mean it won't work.
Yeah.
And I think that's where.
And Al, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I know that, like, Joe talks like about a lot of facts from that scenario, in terms of when we talk about meme coins on BTC, and the fact we've probably got work to be doing there, right? But like, do you echo those thoughts on kind of ecosystem, or do you see anything different from where we are?
I mean, obviously, like the infrastructure has a long way to go, but I also don't, for the current meme coin on Bitcoin thesis, I don't think that it needs to get that much better. Like, there's such a fixation on fungible memes across our space. And that's something I wanted to touch on related to what Joe is saying. It's like the life-changing experience of being part of the on-chain ecosystem on Bitcoin for me is, I never had any Bitcoin before this. And like, here's another dynamic, another set of verticals that you can approach to stack Bitcoin, right?
Sure.
Like, I think a lot of
I
people.
will echo that as well. Before this, I did not have any Bitcoin at all, simply because there was no on-chain activity to it. But yeah.
Yeah, like I would just always like consolidate into whatever chain I was using, right? I think a lot of people who have been like Web3 focused in the past cycle are lacking Bitcoin exposure. And this is probably the most intelligible way for them to get it and to play the opportunities that they're familiar with in order to accumulate Bitcoin, which I think everyone actually, maybe because of ordinals, has started to realize the significance of when they didn't think about it beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah, and like, I guess I'm from a different era to you guys, and like a different background. My primary focus has always been trading, and so from kind of guys that were around during my years of trading crypto, like we had BitMEX, and BitMEX all profit loss was done in BTC. So whenever we were trading, like we were that exact epitome of what you're talking about now, which is like the stacking sats thought process. And when we used to trade on MEX, all of our payouts were in BTC. So when we used to have our classic alt seasons, we used to rotate from trading BTC, and then our extra BTC was made through trading the pairings, right? It was through trading XRP BTC. ADA BTC, and again the payout was in BTC. And so in those times where BTC was kind of flatter, then we had the opportunity of accumulating BTC there. But I think that thought process is actually probably quite a powerful one for a lot of people. And in the trading world, the dynamics have changed quite a lot to be primarily USDT or USDC payouts on trades, no longer trading against BTC. Now there are still locations where that's possible, but again, you're referring to something which again has kind of like been around from the trading space for a while, but obviously now is directly applicable to the Web3 space in BTC, which is quite nice. Like it's a good environment for people to be in, especially when BTC is increasing in value, and you feel like priced out sometimes because again times have changed a fucking lot, right? And we're now looking at a ridiculously high number BTC. hopefully goes a hell of a lot higher in the coming months. But yeah, sometimes that can be daunting. So the ability to actually just spin BTC in an appreciating asset is a huge bonus as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I could not agree more.
it's 100% agree too. And you know, as we get closer and closer to this euphoric bull run that everyone anticipates to happen over the coming year plus, you know, if we look at just the trends of human nature from a psychological perspective, people are always risk taking or looking for ways to add risk to their portfolio to get additional leverage on Bitcoin itself. In your era, it was, you know, altcoins that were pegged to Bitcoin, whether it was XRP or other
Yeah.
tokens. In the ICO boom, it was, you know, Binance pegging all of these ICOs in BTC terms, or you know, in some ways, even going down to pegging things in ETH.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, like meme coins on Bitcoin and even ordinals on Bitcoin are just levered long Bitcoin, at least from like, you know, the retail perspective of risk on behavior. It's a leveraged bet on Bitcoin as an ecosystem to perform well, which is, you know, attracting more capital into the ecosystem once you have more functionality, but it's also a levered bet on Bitcoin without any sort of liquidation risk. I mean, you have pricing volatility, you have fiat-based traders, but I think the general consensus across everyone here participating at this point in time is everyone's pricing their bags in sats and not dollars, and that kind of philosophy goes out the window even more so when you do have euphoria and emotions play a large factor from like the macro environment for Bitcoin to be very favorable.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I find it interesting that you guys think in that basis, I guess. Because, you know, again, it obviously not just allegiance to the chain, right? It's obviously it's allegiance to an asset that you believe in fundamentally, and it's an asset that you wish to hold. Like I said, it's a thought process that probably skipped a generation in terms of like trading BitMEX. Then it missed a load of people, like that thought process of kind of like stacking sats. And this environment has created something where people maybe put more emphasis back on that side of things.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
agree. And if you just look at like, you know, fiat dollars themselves, there's this natural inclination that we're in a pretty inflating fiat dollar situation with the U.S. spending more than it has ever had, and that doesn't seem to be stopping. So what are you gonna do? Are you gonna stack military-backed dollars? I think the case for stacking sats makes even more and more sense. So just, you know, it adds fuel to the fire,
Yeah.
even more so to the.
I think something I want to add also is like both of us, me and Joe, are part of that generation that was skipped in terms of that mindset that
Sure.
formed like an actual appreciation for Bitcoin. And then once you pay attention to the on-chain ecosystem, you're just forced to learn so much about Bitcoin in order to be competent on it. And I think you just naturally start to gain appreciation for the thing itself, right? I think all of us have sort of started to think about Bitcoin in its greater context against the dollar, against fiat, in ways that we probably never did when we were thinking just in terms of Ethereum and Solana. Like at
Yep.
this point, if I look 10 years into the future, I can't necessarily with conviction tell you that anything other than Bitcoin is going to be there in the
Sure.
same way, right? And yeah, that's just a completely new perspective that's been born through the experience of this ecosystem.
Yeah. And I think that's great. Like I think that's a really like a great view to have. Like I really like it when people kind of like strengthen beliefs in asset selection, you know, just from like an investment perspective. I always think like number one, learn as much about the asset as possible, because, you know, the more education you have, the more appreciation you have, and then that raises the emotional threshold for, you know, holding Bitcoin, surviving through drawdown, adding to positions, etc. So anything on that side, like from my perspective, is you know, a huge bonus for people to learn about. And like I said, I think the runes environment plays very nicely to reinstate that belief that like I said, skip to generation, you guys have picked up on it now, and it's now the focus for you, which again I think is a great place. So we'll focus a little bit more on kind of like current rune market environment. And we'll dive into kind of like some of the projects that you guys have maybe been trading or kind of dabbling around in the in a little bit. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you is when we look kind of at the current rune selection we have, and I'll give it from my perspective first. I think that what we have on runes is actually something that's quite special, in that the way that I view this is like a controlled playground for meme coins, because there isn't a huge asset selection. Like, there's a relatively simplified list of markets that people trade. There might be new things that appear on a week by week basis, but we're not being flooded with thousands upon thousands of tickers and options for us to trade. And so we actually have this quite focused area, which is super helpful from a trading aspect, because again, it keeps your attention on one path instead of being pulled into 50 different releases throughout the day that you're throwing money at. So like, what are your guys' thoughts on the runes ecosystem kind of as a whole, whether or not you echo those thoughts or feel anything different? And Owl, why don't you kick off on that?
It's a really good question. I think I largely agree with you. I mean, there's kind of few to choose from. It's been very experimental, and the ones that have gained prominence, except for like ignoring the past week where some new exciting things have happened that previously hadn't really ever happened in the runes ecosystem. Before that, you're talking about experimenters who believe in this idea of fungibles on Bitcoin, who have been like building up a vibe, a story, a narrative, a cult, a community. And there's not really that many of them that have solidified anything major. It's a very small playground. And I do agree. I've seen you tweet a lot about rising tide lifting all boats. I don't think it's ever been more likely to be true about an ecosystem than runes, because there's so few that actually have traction in a way that's meaningful, that have resonated. Right.
And I think it's like the sustained like resonation thing as well. Like the stuff that's stuck around through initial launch to where it is now. You look at the top 15, a vast majority of those names will still be recognizable from back in May to where we are now. Yep.
100%.
Sorry, another thing. Carry on.
Oh, no, that's all good. Yeah, you added something dope. Another thing that I think I've always appreciated about the way this works is that, so I do a lot of Bitcoining all over the place. I love memes. I've been swept away in the whole narrative. I all see it as a way to increase Bitcoin because of the experience over the past couple of years. But the big difference with runes is that essentially everyone who mints one is buying in at relatively a consistent market cap, which is not actually the same for almost any other shitcoin we deal in, right? Like, if you average the fees over the course of a window, and obviously, like, once this gets a lot more saturated, maybe it'll be some kind of a gas war equivalent thing where that doesn't apply quite the same. But generally speaking, like, I mean, Gizmo is a great example. Like, if you want to get into something, you can get into the mint, right, while that window's open, and everyone's sort of buying in at the same initial FDV, which is a completely different dynamic from any other shitcoin ecosystem I've played in. I think that's like the fairness of that is something that I think is going to be delved into a lot over the next few months, over the next several months, as we watch this all grow.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. So Joe, I'll let you come in if there's anything you want to add kind of on top of that discussion, and then I'll add kind of my thoughts on the fair minting side and what that looks like.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think it's just a testament of how mature this ecosystem really is, or lack thereof in this case. When I think when an ecosystem becomes hot, then you have this pump fun level of millions of tickers being launched over and over again. I mean, we can certainly probably get there at some point, but then it becomes PvP. But I think the winners are frequently decided relatively early on because they have the ability to, I would say one, distribute to, holder bases, which are going to be, long-term believers, as Murad likes to kind of allude to, and form a community and cult around the token, like mission, for example. Like Dog's mission is really much to go to the moon. I mean,
Yeah.
price wise, and
Yeah.
eat with the top dogs. No pun intended, really,
Yeah.
of other chains.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at some of the winners so far, I mean, it's really been three of them that are approaching or at, would say, nine-figure market caps. With those three being Dog, Pups, and Billy.
Yeah.
And each of them have something very similar in common, where they have this community feel behind it. Some of them are very much like funny meme oriented, like Pups, for example. Some of them are more friendly, cute as a cat,
Mm-hmm.
like BDC is really leaning into, and some of them are just very mid curve, that it's just a dog, and I don't necessarily starting to see the light in that, of like, the simplicity of it just allows it to be compared from a relative valuation perspective,
Yeah, sure.
From all parties. And I think because there is this natural comparison of like, oh, other chains have a dog and it's 2 billion, and
Yep.
Ethereum has a dog and it's
Yeah.
16 billion, and it's very easy to say, oh, like, there's this relative valuation gap.
Sure.
Now, how quickly it obviously gets there just is a factor of how much capital starts to flow into the ecosystem, and how, I guess, accessible it is from a distribution perspective. Not everyone wants to come to Bitcoin, and certainly if it was easier to do so, and the infrastructure was relatively better, I suppose, then we would see these things at a factor of 5 to 10x upwards
Yep.
of here. Now, I think over time, we've seen this in like ordinals, for example, where in moments of I guess hype, a lot of the attention starts to go into microcaps. In the case of ordinals, it was microcap free launch mints, or inscribe your own type of collections. And people are always going to be chasing the easiest 10x or the easiest 50x, but the larger capital, is much more patient, is much more aligned to sit and wait, and just wait things to get to the point where they can be closer in terms of relative valuation. And I think, like, because we've already achieved that from an ordinals perspective, where now some of the top 10K collections on Bitcoin are very much in line with top 10K collections from Solana and Ethereum. I still think that there is a valuation gap there.
Sure.
Anyways, but that being said, because we've already done it with one asset class, I think we can certainly do it with another asset class. And I think once the hype to some of these is back, where now we have multi-billion-dollar meme coins on Bitcoin,
Yeah.
there will be a much more lively playground to try and chase the next biggest thing. And certainly, I think there's going to be winners, much like we see on Solana, where things go to hundreds of millions of dollars in market cap in a very short span of time.
Yeah.
But I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Quite frankly, I think that's a good thing for some of the winners, as it just reinforces the fact that they are the top dogs and the kingmakers. And it's hard to, I would say, it's hard to recreate distribution. It's hard to recreate, distribution of dog. You can retry it, I suppose, but it rarely works out the same way. And so, yeah, I think there's certainly this playground and this blue ocean for people to run meme coins up to, nine figures.
Yep.
In the future. I think that there's a business case for anyone who wants to try and do that and work for their bags, and I think that's not a bad thing. And I think, certainly if runes are the de facto token standard of Bitcoin, and get adoption from a centralized exchange perspective, they're very much able to hit that. Now, on the centralized exchange side of things,
Yeah, no, that
because
was where I was
I know
gonna. I
how.
was waiting for you to, because that was my instant segue. I've already got the note here. I was waiting to go to the centralized exchange.
Yeah, you know, the business model of centralized exchanges is to take a portion of the supply, be it by deposits
Yep.
or by flat fee listings, and market makers taking token
Yep.
loans, you know, anywhere from 1 to 3% of the supply to balance the books across your centralized exchange listings. This is kind of how it's been done traditionally, but you know, the fact that Runes allows you to mint for a fee in a fair way with typically no pre-mine being the success story, it makes it very difficult for any single actor to run these things successfully because you just don't have enough ammo.
Yep.
You know, these things are very costly across the board. And so I think, you know, this maybe puts a damper on some of these projects. But the best ones will have, I would say, 10 to 20 holders. I would say gang up together and do what's right for not only themselves but also the existing holders, to collaborate and pay some of these listings
Yep.
and you know chip in the token supply that is necessary
And
to
that
get this done.
that basically was going to be like my question here was, you know, like as soon as you brought up centralized exchange, I was like, right, that's perfect, that's the segue I needed. But you know, basically, like one of the things that I guess the rune space has always been proud of is this fair mint process, and you've alluded to it, you know, a couple of times, and also the pre-mine. So from anybody in chat that's unaware, like the pre-mine is essentially a segregated amount of the supply that is kept for the minter, or the inscriber, and that is kept to, I don't know, whatever purpose it might be, whether or not that be to dump on you in the future. However, from a BTC perspective, that typically one of the major selling points of a lot of Runes projects is that there is no pre-mine. Okay, so what that does is that strengthens the belief that this project isn't going to be a rug because we don't have this large supply overhang, which is held by a team, random developers, whatever it might be. The downside of that, as Joe kind of touched on there, is really from a supply perspective for listings. So when exchanges are asking for a percentage from market makers, books, etc., then that can be very difficult for a project to supply. Now, I think probably my view on this is that I think you're right in terms of, you know, kind of people grouping together in order to provide that to exchanges. And I think in some of the strongest communities, you will get that process. You know, I think that top holders, that's inevitably where they want to see the projects, you know, given the reach of centralized exchanges and, you know, the Runes ecosystem as a whole being elevated in that situation. But where do you see this, Al? Like, how do you see kind of overcoming that process of being fair and runes being kind of what is perceived as a fair playground? And I think that would be right in that just broad stereotype. And then essentially the supply problems created from being fair to the end customer, essentially.
Well, I think first of all, anyone who's etching a rune and is planning on putting a lot of time into their lives, whether or not they pre-mine it, is probably minting a lot of, well,
Sure.
assuming no pre-mine, is probably minting a lot of it,
Yeah.
right? Because exposure to, I think it's cool because you like put skin in the game when you don't pre-mine. But I would assume almost every team has something significant that they've minted themselves when there's no pre-mine to begin with. So I think there is a certain illusory nature to that as well.
Sure.
What's fair about it is that they're buying in at probably relatively the same price as everyone else, right? But I think
And I think that's a
I
very
would
fair
imagine
distinction.
I think almost every single Runes project with no pre-mine has its own bags of their project because otherwise, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah,
What's your
sure.
incentive,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's not like this completely let's all work together vibe necessarily. I think the biggest will certainly find ways to work together for those listings, and I would suspect that some of the more forward thinking deployers have already prepared for that eventuality.
Yeah,
Then
sure.
what you need is just like one of them to get a tier one listing, and the entire landscape changes, right? Like everyone's mind starts being oriented towards centralized exchanges
Sure.
and how to make such things happen. It becomes a realized possibility, right? And I think a mix of the two, but I would suspect mostly teams are actually more prepared than you'd think.
And then in terms of like goals for runes, are you both in agreement that a centralized exchange listing should be kind of seen as a level of success?
I think it's a level of success, but I don't think every rune is necessarily going to get one. I mean, I think my success condition is a thriving on-chain ecosystem where people can trade and make crazy returns, never having to leave the base layer. Right.
Sure.
That's what I would see as the greatest success condition. But I do think centralized exchanges and the demand that they can bring are an extremely important component of making that a reality. Right. Like it's going to be the extreme, and those are the things that are going to go the absolute highest. I mean, we saw it with Ordi and Sats at the end of the day, right? Actually, Pups is a really good example that's a little bit different because that sort of ran up to its all-time high on chain in anticipation of runes, right, Joe?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, beyond the fact that Arthur Hayes and Ansem certainly played a significant role
I mean,
accidentally.
Arthur probably played a role in topping it, but
Yeah, yeah.
but
I
yeah,
see an
Well,
Arthur.
yeah,
I
the
usually
Arthur
try to
guy
make
was certainly.
profit.
yeah.
So yeah,
But
I mean,
yeah,
I resonate a lot of those thoughts. I think in some ways it is a marker of success because it just shows, I mean, to the public that you have you have much more demand than the on-chain ecosystem really entails. And I think, I'm a very native on-chain user. Like I seldomly touch a centralized exchange because I believe like most of the opportunities to be early or remain in being on-chain, and the centralized exchange opportunities to me are just, it just feels far too late. I like to feel early. And I think, when you can play the full cycle, I guess, to a centralized exchange listing and, beyond that, I would say like mass public awareness, and then I think that's when you have like, I guess, from a individual that's running one of those things, that to me is like the ultimate story because then it truly outlives, any sort of um, contribution that you make. It's its own, freely breathing thing. It's
Sure.
its own freely breathing ecosystem.
Yeah.
Like that's the level of success that I envision for something like Pups, for example. Um, but as an on-chain native individual, like there is so much opportunity to capture the awareness of everyone who is here and playing around and trading on chain, not only on Bitcoin or it can be on Solana, it can be on Ethereum. We're seeing this kind of happen with things like SPX and APU.
Hmm.
They're an omni-chain token now between Solana and Ethereum, and I think that's the level of like, I guess that to me is much better or far greater of an unlock than a centralized exchange listing, because I think if you can dominate and be aware uh, to anybody on Ethereum, on Solana, and on Bitcoin, the level of success that you're able to achieve once you have a centralized exchange listing is amplified. I personally think that because not only are you, I would say, much more distributed from a holder base perspective, but the proof is really like, can you succeed on chain? And if you can succeed on chain, then you can succeed on a centralized exchange. Actually, Arthur Hayes has a really good article that he drafted a couple days ago, where he mentions like a lot of the teams that he's working with are always asking him like, oh, like we just need a Binance listing, and like, can you help us get
Yeah.
one? Or we need a Bybit listing, can you help us get one? The reality is like you have to create awareness and demand wherever you're really going.
Yeah.
Just because you are listed on a centralized exchange doesn't naturally trigger this demand. We see this from other runes which are going to Solana now, and that's a very competitive playground. There's hundreds of really good memes out there,
Yeah.
and you have to be able to hold it down, not only with memes but everything else on that chain, which is highly competitive to begin with. So,
Yeah.
I think
And like
if you can't do, you can't be successful.
I've spoken about like that from like a waddle perspective, right? Like the soul thing, because I think that, you know, like a lot of people ask like, oh, are you going to go to soul, or are there any plans for soul? And like my thing is that it's kind of, it feels BTC kind of like through and through. So there's no intent on kind of my side to leave that currently. And the second part of that is like I've always referred to Sol as like the swamp. And I know as soon as something lands there, you have to scream so loudly to make a noise that it's very, very challenging. And we spoke previously about, you know, kind of the kind of very focused view that we currently have on the rune space and the projects that are here, and you know those projects that have been around for a decent length of time now. Whereas as soon as you jump to Soul without the right base, then you're just lost in the crowd like very quickly. And you know, as a potential failure point for a project, I think that that kind of has a huge amount of risk to it. You know, that can't be overcome. Pups, different beast, right? Different beast, different level of demand. Whereas when you're looking at smaller things, I think that that move, whether that be on chain or even centralized exchange listings, because you know, look how much shit we see getting listed by centralized exchanges that just have zero volume. Like zero, there's actually just no demand, right? They're just cashing in on the fact that you're paying them to list, and that's it. So I think it's a very, very important step. Obviously, positives and negatives either way. But I think, again, you know, just the focus on this ecosystem as it currently stands and still in an infancy stage, you know, is still incredibly important for any project that's looking to go the distance.
Yeah, I I 100% agree. And I think, yeah, pros and cons, it depends on the context of the coin. I think it probably makes more sense for things that already have a very strong base, high market cap,
Yeah.
a lot of attention to begin with. Personally, with Wanko, I just don't think it makes sense. Like, and for a lot of smaller runes, I don't think it necessarily makes sense, because if you were to do such a thing too early, it almost feels like you're turning your back
Yeah.
on the ecosystem
Yeah. I think that's the
in a
thing.
certain way. Like it sort of can maybe pollute what you're trying to do. Like, okay, you're leaving behind this nascent ecosystem to chase volume and speed and
Yeah.
try to add your voice to this absolute madness.
Yeah.
And you know, I think another thing to be said is that like the pacing of the on-chain ecosystem on Sol and Bitcoin is completely fucking different. Like, right, you can't really make like ordinals and runes. It's very unrealistic to get in and out of a trade quickly.
Yeah.
And maybe that'll change at some point, right? But like generally people just down to the blocks taking 10 fucking minutes,
Yeah.
right? You're not going to buy and sell within the same minute. Generally people are moving at a different rhythm, whereas Sol, like, I don't know, I know people who buy and sell the same coin 15 times.
Yeah.
I don't know, right? I think, you know, aligning those two communities and vibes might be a little bit tricky, and they could potentially work against each other. Like, so suddenly you have to deal with two completely different games.
Yeah.
And
It's
yeah,
it's
that's just my take on that.
it's a totally different holder, right? Like the I would say time horizon for someone trading meme coins on Sol is like typically, I would say it's largely driven primarily due to the influx of PvP nature and I guess psychology that's been driven a lot by the pump fund narrative, where people are looking for a quick 2x, and like that's the type of dopamine spike that they're chasing in a lot of ways to try and get some of these things. Whereas like on Bitcoin, like I tweeted this not that long ago, but the runes communities are very like interactive and friendly, and can build interactive lore between one another, where it's like, Psycho is building upon the drama, so to speak, from like the puppets community, and now having this Gizmo cat and pups as community adopted tokens, and psychos playing into it, and you can have some fun with it, and lean into it. Each of these are like living and breathing communities with their own kind of storyboard, and the communities that build stories within them. And I think that part just makes meme coining on Bitcoin so much more fun and interactive, and friendly,
Yeah.
rather than this very trading oriented holder base where they're buying it quick, they're buying it out. I just view like Solana, like once you go to Solana, it's you stop building a very strong holder base, and you start getting into the hands of short-sighted traders. And it's not dissimilar from centralized exchange listings. Like, I don't think I've ever heard anyone buying a token on a centralized exchange listing because they just really love the Telegram community.
Yeah.
Like they bought it simply because they're looking at the chart and they see price going up, and they heard their friend, made a bunch of money on this, and they're living this false illusion that WAGMI can exist.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the foundation, you have to have, like you said, CBS, you have to have like a strong foundation, and the way that you do that with any sort of meme coin is by dominating on the chain that you've created it on and you run it on. And so leaving too early then really is like this light switch. Either people love it and there's demand, and it's net positive, or it's the potential to have catastrophic failure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
And I
think
think from my side, like that's always been like the risk is just far too great anyway. Like when you're talking about the size of something like Waddle, right? Like we still got so much work to do, right? Before it's even a part of the discussion that I'd be willing to entertain. Like there's
and,
just
and
literally so much.
Yeah.
And it's really why like exchange listings themselves have criteria that they have to begin with,
Yep.
because they look at it beyond like how many holders do you have, and what's your daily active trading volume.
Mm-hmm.
And if those two metrics are very weak, then they know that it's not necessarily going to be a successful
Yeah.
listing opportunity for them. I obviously like the tier 3, tier 2 exchanges. You pay them 50 grand or 100
Yeah.
grand, they're listing you anyways,
Yeah.
eyes closed.
Yeah.
'Cause a listing agent is getting commissions, and that's really the incentive model there.
Yeah.
But the better ones like Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, like they're not listing things eyes closed. They're very calculated to make sure that their user experience and the, I guess, wealth experience that they're creating and promising as an exchange, in retaining whole like users themselves. Like the last thing that they want is to list something and it goes 98% down for
Yeah.
anybody that bought into Binance, right? They're looking for win-win scenarios,
Yeah.
for each and every one of the holders in their distribution list, because that's really the only way that they grow as a business, is to provide net positive opportunities for, I guess, monetary enrichment, which is what people use centralized exchanges to begin with.
Yep. And I think
I
that's
got something to add
yeah. Go.
real quick. I just want to. I was thinking about pups and its move to Solana and its run up. So just to put it back in context, right? Like, I think the reason that really worked is because people wanted exposure to the Bitcoin asset more than anything, right? It's like there was this extension on Solana that allowed you to get access to this Bitcoin asset when pre-runes seemed like this magical, oh, like runes were godsend. They were gonna change everything, et cetera, right? So Solana people were like, okay, it's easy for me to get into that narrative. But if there hadn't been a strong narrative drawing people towards Bitcoin and its on-chain ecosystem to begin with, I don't know that that Sol move would have helped particularly, if that makes sense.
And Owl, I don't think I would have made that move if I didn't feel highly confident that it was going to be a success story. Although the first 72 hours was an absolute nightmare, because much like CBS said, the holder base on Bitcoin was just like, the beauty of it is it's slow. Like the beauty of it is it's on Bitcoin. This is a nightmare and a
Yeah.
disaster. And then 48 hours passed and everyone was seemingly talking about it. So
Yeah. And as I said, success law. everything else rolled into the decision making. But yeah, I can imagine with a community like you've got, kind of that decision is a big one. So why don't we spend the last just like 5 minutes here, just running through kind of where we are market wise now. Anything that you guys, kind of have found interesting over the course of the last week or so. I know that we've had, a couple of runners. We've had Coda, which kind of came out last night or yesterday afternoon, and then had its nice run up. We've had Gizmo, obviously, in that span of time since my last stream last week. And obviously, the other big thing is we've had from just a stats perspective is we've had this big volume increase, which has been pretty well documented, kind of across the board over the space of the last probably 14 days or so. We're starting to see Rune's volume increase substantially. So what projects are kind of out there that you think have kind of maybe elevated themselves into a potentially kind of top 10 scenario in the long term, but just anything really that you want to discuss on the action over the course of the last week? Do you want to kick off, Al?
Yeah. Gizmo, first of all, I mean, I love Coda as like, it extends this deep lore of node monks and fucking puppets going at each other.
Yeah.
Right. But I would consider it a derivative play to Gizmo, right? It's like pet meme of associated with a community. So I mean, I think the real phenomenon we're observing is Gizmo. I think I don't really know how I hold some, I minted some. I already covered my costs. I'm gonna hold the rest wherever it goes. I'm sort of just always stacking runes bags, expecting everything sort of to blow up.
Yeah, that's it.
At some point.
That's a great investor logic. Honestly, that's the blind optimism that everybody's here for.
Yeah, I just think, you're going to have a lot of fucking winners in this ecosystem and you just want bags of everything. But Gizmo proves that our trenches have signs of life, right?
Yep.
Like something can pop into the Twitter sphere and run up. I think that's a new dynamic that we haven't really seen since maybe the first week.
Yeah.
Right. And in terms of like the rest of the runes, like there's the obvious large caps. I think we are going to see, and we have sort of seen this in the volume so far, a constant rotation of profits, both from the large caps and from like successful plays like these, that goes into the ones that have gained traction already over time.
Yeah.
Right. That's the main dynamic I'm observing. There's dedicated people who are talented traders when it comes to trading on chain on Bitcoin. They're going to capitalize on most of the wins the best in the early stages, and the rotation will go into the ones that they have affinity for and emotional resonance with.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, obviously Based Internet Panda has gone on a fucking tear. That established a community a long time ago. WADDLE has been on a fucking tear. That established a community a long time ago and set itself apart. Decentralized, like I have a good amount of it. I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest, but obviously it did gain traction with some people because we've seen a rotation into it.
Yeah.
Off of the backs of these other successes, right? That goes for Psycho, that goes for Wanko Manko, that goes for Mr. Yen, that goes for Gob,
Yes.
I would say.
Yeah, and like rabbits in chat just had like a relatively good question, which feeds directly into what you're talking about, which is why I semi interrupted you. And he says like, what week one OG rune that's dropped out of favor over the last few months might be a sleeper? And like even
So,
some
I
of the
mean,
stuff you've rattled off,
the
like
market caps are still so small, and the inefficiency of how, just listing, buying, and selling works is that, like, a lot of the ones that have quote unquote run, in my opinion, are at laughably small market caps.
Sure.
In fact, everything I just mentioned in that list is kind of a laughably small market cap.
Yep.
I don't know that it makes sense to me to chase something that's like under $1 million or it's like 500K, 400K. I have a couple that maybe come to mind, but I haven't seen them active on Twitter or trying to mount a resurgence. So I
Sure.
don't feel like there's some that had their moment in time.
Like people in chat
But
saying
like,
that Wanko is undervalued.
I would 100% agree. I mean, look, Wank was a ridiculous story, and I etched it. I can tell it. We the meme being in our ecosystem, our founder, Casey Rodemer, is a very interesting person, to say the least, right? He'll go on some freaky tirades just often. And the meme, the joke has often been what this man, this insane man, has our net worth in his hands, right? And in anticipation of the protocol, we were just like digging through his lore, just his blog, and we found the freakiest, most disturbing story ever. And we were like, fuck it, I should see what happens. And like it just resonated. Like this was always sort of the hope. Like at some point he has to talk about it. But
Yeah.
actually, and in fact, Joe minted a shit ton because apparently he tweeted about it like right when the etching went live and then deleted it. And Joe like tracks Casey's Twitter because he's elite like that and minted a bunch of that. I didn't even know this. I had no confidence. It was not minting out. And yeah, like our founder, who notoriously has not really engaged with almost any rune whatsoever, just like fully went insane posting about it. And like I know the entire org team has been just wildly entertained by it all.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's a wholesome, it's part of like the freaky culture or different unique culture of our ecosystem,
sure.
I would say.
And you're right. Like I
And
think it was like with a lot of the stuff that we've discussed and where we are right now in terms of the life cycle, the birthing of this ecosystem. It's like the law. There's law, right? There's law between pretty much every project,
so much
everything.
lore.
Yeah.
There's so much lore. And you know, like even so Mr. Yan recently just posted this tweet like thanking Wanko for like retweeting his original tweet from his account, which
Yeah.
was about Wanko, right? It's like there's lore and there's relationships between all of these runes that have been built up over time. And yeah, there's a whole culture that this evolved out of on ordinals in the first place. That is, it's just rich.
And I think you touch on that point as well. And like Joe, you can come in to like discuss the market or this point that I'm going to make here. But one of the things that I think is so unique, and I'll just use the word beautiful, right, about runes culture in general, is not necessarily like an anti PvP environment, but something that is more of like everybody trying to uplift everyone, because there's no reason to be having like this civil war battle within this ecosystem, given the nature of how small it is. And the interaction between projects, if anything, like I'll just like reference like Psycho, right? So like Psycho Hamster, one of the kind of edgier projects.
Love Psycho.
Yeah, like great project. I love Psycho as well. And like they do a really good job of straddling the line between like banter and not being actually nasty, right? Like and that's a great position to be in. And I think like the ecosystem as a whole really kind of has that vibe, you know, projects retweeting other projects, projects discussing other projects. So like I really love that about the space. It really doesn't feel as though like, you know, fuck your project, it's a piece of shit, ours is the best. Like it feels as though there's a good element of like competitiveness, but not actual malicious behavior.
Agreed. And another thing is that when like I notice a lot of other project accounts liking my tweets about different projects. Like they're all every project is tracking the rune space, right? Every runes project is tracking the rune space as a whole. Everyone sort of has a sense of who's a serious player, like who's taking this seriously and has built something real, something that resonates, right? And there is this sort of support, just a supportive dynamic. I think if anything at this stage, and I'm sure this will change at some point as we grow, you know, things get weird when everything grows big.
Of course.
But like at this stage, it feels more like the established projects that have built something that people resonate with are defending the ecosystem against projects that don't match the vibe.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah. Like there's an alignment between everyone who's running a project and has built something real.
And I think there's a level of comfort in that as well, is like from like a project perspective, I think there's a level of comfort in knowing that you're at that level where it's not like the community is established or is still being built, but you're not like fighting for attention. Like I think there's a level of like comfort that comes from a lot of projects where they're just like happy to shoot the shit and just tweet like a normal person. um, and so I think that plays a big part as well. Joe, do you want to talk about anything kind of over the last week, or do you want to play into the discussions on
Yeah,
the kind nature?
I yeah, I mean, look, I think because it's so early and because some of these things have maybe established some sense of community around them, they've been able to carve out this specific category for themselves. And I think like when meme coins feel like they own a certain vertical of category and energy to them, then that to me shows that they are unfuckwithable, basically, right? Like I think that's really the key part. Like I don't think anybody can come in and get the culture as well as Psycho has done more recently. There's certainly going to be there's going to be people that try and recreate that sort of energy, but I think whoever is mastering the social media handles and as well as the community side of things, they're doing a very good job, and they're definitely like someone who's been around for quite some time to understand the dynamics between projects, between people, and build this sense around it. I think some projects are definitely trying to create that element more than others, whereas some can live without that element at all. Like Dog doesn't necessarily tweet in any way, shape, or form, quite frankly. It doesn't necessarily even have a social media handle that is run by a specific party. It's just I don't even know. I don't even see any interaction or engagement from that account anyways. So it doesn't necessarily need to have anything, right? So yeah, I think that friendly nature is today. I think it's gonna get much more competitive over
Mhm.
time, where some of the vibes and elements certainly overlap, and now you're, I guess, trying to vampire attack a community to believing that the gains and the community in your place is much stronger. I think that's kind of where some of the drama came in from Pups and Gizmo, where they were kind of chasing the same type of community
Sure.
to bandwagon the token. And I think there still is probably some level of friction between those two, as some Pups holders felt threatened by Gizmo and the Puppeteer, which was tweeting about his imaginary kitten very, very often. Whereas some just realized that, look, like the puppets are the puppets, and Pups is related to puppets more than this Gizmo is related to puppets, and it just provides them another playground to have fun. And some people have embraced both, and I think that's also not a bad direction to go down.
Yeah.
Does it fragment liquidity and attention? Yeah, certainly, but I think over time, it's all fun, like it's all fair in love and war at the end of the day, and this is a free market. We're living in a permissionless system on the biggest blockchain in the world that has arguably the most amount of liquidity and user unlocks over time. So I think if you've been around more than 6 months to a year, you're certainly not worried, whereas like maybe if you purchased or bought into the community in the last 3 months, you maybe start to feel some nervousness around it. Yeah, look, I think I'm excited to see what comes about from the WADDLE side of things too. Kind of the original, I guess, animal-based meme coin um, as a penguin.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking forward to see the community start to form around it, the culture form around it as well. It's very much in a category where I kind of view it as like it's independent enough that it's not chasing the same type of energy and crowd as some of the other ones, where sometimes distancing yourself from this competitive dynamic allows you to live longer and absorb the noise. We kind of seen this with, like, collections, for example, on the ordinal side, where OMB was just in some ways just totally different because it wasn't pixel art.
Yeah.
It stayed away from like the Node Monkeys themes and noise between the puppets, and it stayed away from Bitcoin Frogs noise, and it stayed away from like the Pizza Ninjas clamoring that they deserve to be, having a floor price significantly higher, and that they're, I wouldn't say better, but everyone's trying to work for their bags at the end of the day, and I think sometimes distancing yourself from the noise is very helpful over the course of the long period of time. So yeah, I'm just personally very excited to see where all this goes. And yeah, I mean, I think we'll see more cross-chain initiatives. We've seen one more recently as like a permissioned bridge operator with BDC. I'm not necessarily in favor of not having users make markets and have access to positive arbitrage or negative arbitrage sometimes. Well, depends on what chain you're really coming from. So I think, I'm a much more believer in just letting the free markets do its thing. And I think price efficiency in a lot of ways will come over time once everything starts to mature a little bit.
Yeah, agreed. And we'll wrap up here for this week because I've taken over an hour of your guys' time now, which I'm very appreciative for. So if there's anything that you guys want to call out, draw attention to, Owl, please feel free to, and Joe the same after Owl. And if not, then I can wrap up.
Appreciate you, man. Well, thanks for having me. I mean, I'll say I love what you're doing with fucking WADDLE. And I think my take to anyone who is listening is pick a room with a fucking established community and traction. I don't think you can really go wrong if you believe in the general on-chain thesis of where this is going. And I mean, spread your exposure amongst a few even, right? Like just fucking bag up on rooms to whatever degree you're comfortable. If you think that fucking fungibles on chain on Bitcoin have a future, which I don't know, in a crazy, silly bull market is not the strangest fucking narrative I've heard.
No, absolutely right.
Yeah.
And you, Joe?
So much higher is the long story short, is the way that I see it.
So much fucking higher.
Yeah, what a great vibe to end on. Yeah, so much higher. And so yeah, so thank you very much to both of you. I'm gonna deafen the Discord, but if you wouldn't mind hanging around just while I finish up, I'll be 30 seconds, and I just want to thank you again. So if you just give me 1 second, I'll be with you guys now. So big thank you everybody for tuning in, very much appreciated, and huge thank you as well to Al and Joe. Very, very good guests to have. I would love to be able to just like take their time every week because it was a great discussion. So I hope that you guys got some value from it, from hearing those guys discuss the ecosystem as a whole, not just me rambling on about things. And then, given the fact that those guys have had their final say, I'll have my final say in WADDLE is going through its rebrand currently, and all things being well, that should be live by the end of this week. So Friday, we should be live with a full rebrand. And so there's a very not different necessarily visual vibe going to be going on for WADDLE, but something that certainly is a lot more modern and will enable us to really push forward. So that's to come on Friday, and I very much look forward to kind of the reveal of that to everybody. But once again, a massive thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening, and I will see